the indifference as to its use, the lack of attachment to any individual because it is unrelated to any of them, the objectivity inherent in money as a mere means which excludes any emotional relationship. All this produces an ominous analogy between money and prostitution. Kant's moral imperative never to use human beings as a mere means but to accept and treat them always, at the same time, as ends in themselves is blatantly disregarded by both parties in the case of prostitution. Of all human relationships, prostitution is perhaps the most striking instance of mutual degradation to a mere means, and this may be the strongest and most fundamental factor that places prostitution in such a close historical relationship to the money economy, the economy of means in the strictest sense. This is the basis for the fact that the terrible degradation that is inherent in prostitution is most clearly expressed by its money equivalent. It certainly signifies the nadir of human dignity if a woman surrenders her most intimate and most personal quality, which should be offered only on the basis of a genuine personal impulse and also only with equal personal devotion on the part of the male, in so far as this might have a different importance for the man compared with the woman, for a totally impersonal, purely extraneous and objective compensation. We experience here the fullest and most distressing incongruity between giving and taking. More accurately, we can say that the degradation of prostitution lies in the fact that it so degrades a woman's most personal possession, one that is dependent upon the greatest reserve, that the most neutral value devoid of all personal qualities is considered to be an appropriate equivalent. The foregoing characterization of prostitution in terms of money payment leads, however, to certain contradictory considerations which have to be explored in order to place the significance of money into full relief. There seems to be an inconsistency in emphasizing, on the one hand, the personal, intimately individual nature of the sexual surrender of a woman and on the other the fact that the merely sensual relationship between the sexes is of a generic character and that it is something we have in common with the animal kingdom in which the personality and individual inner feelings are extinguished. If men are so inclined to speak of women in the plural, to judge them by lumping them all together in the same pot, then one of the reasons is certainly that the men of crude sensuality are interested in a quality of women that is identical for the seamstress and the princess. Thus, it seems out of the question to find a specifically personal value in this function. All the other functions of a similar level of generality, such as eating, drinking, the regular physiological and even psychological reactions, the instinct of self-preservation and the typical logical functions, are never strongly entwined with the personality as such. One is never inclined to imagine that the practice or presentation of what is indistinguishably common to all men would express or exhaust his innermost, essential and comprehensive nature. Yet such an anomaly does exist with regard to the sexual surrender of women. This completely general act that is identical for people of all strata is experienced, at the same time at least for the woman, as an extremely personal and intimate one. This anomaly may be understood on the basis of the opinion that women as a whole are more deeply rooted in the species type than are men, who are more greatly differentiated and more specifically individualized. It would follow from this view that the species and the personal elements coincide more readily in women. If, in fact, women are more closely and more deeply rooted in the dark primitive forces of nature than are men, then their most essential and personal qualities must also be rooted in those natural, universal functions that guarantee the uniformity of the genus. Furthermore, it follows that the uniformity of the female sex, in whom the general qualities are less clearly distinguished from individual traits, is also reflected in a greater uniformity in the nature of each individual woman. Experience seems to confirm that the various forces, qualities and impulses of the woman are more directly and closely connected with each other than are those of men, whose qualities are more independent, so that the development and fate of each are relatively independent. Women, however, at least according to general opinion, live under the sign of all or nothing. Their inclinations and actions are more closely associated and it is easier, commencing from a single point, to arouse the whole of their being, with all its emotions, volitions and thoughts. If this is indeed the case, then there is a certain justification in the supposition that a woman gives herself up more completely and unreservedly by surrendering this one part of herself, than does the more differentiated man under the same circumstances. The significance of this difference for both is already evident at a more harmless stage of the relationship between man and woman. Even primitive peoples request a different payment for the bridegroom and the bride respectively for dissolving an engagement. Among the Bacocks, for example, she has to pay 5 and he 10 guilders, while among the inhabitants of Bencula the disloyal bridegroom pays 40, the bride only 10 guilders. The significance and the consequences that society attaches to the sexual relations between man and woman are correspondingly based on the presupposition that the woman gives her total self, with all its worth, whereas the man gives only a part of his personality in the exchange. Society therefore denies to a girl who has once gone astray her whole reputation. Society condemns the adultery of the wife much more harshly than that of the husband, of whom it is supposed that an occasional sexual extravagancy is still reconcilable with loyalty to his wife in all its inner and essential elements. Society irredeemably renders the prostitute déclassée, while the worst rake can, as it were, still save himself from the morass by other facets of his personality and can rise to any social position. The purely sexual act that is at issue in prostitution employs only a minimum of the man's ego but a maximum of the woman's, if not in every particular case, then certainly taking all cases together. This relationship explains the role of the pimp as well as the frequently reported cases of lesbianism among prostitutes. Because the prostitute has to endure a terrible void and lack of satisfaction in her relations with men, she searches for a substitute relationship in which at least some other qualities of the partner are involved. Neither the notion that the sexual act is something universal and impersonal, nor the fact that, on the face of it, men and women are equally involved in it changes this relationship in which the stake of the woman is infinitely more personal, more essential, encompassing more of her ego than that of the man and for which, therefore, a money equivalent is most unsuitable and inadequate, the giving and taking of which means the extreme abasement of the female personality. The degradation of the woman by prostitution is not in itself explained by its polyandric character, or by the fact that she has sexual relationships with many men. Genuine polyandry often gives a decisive superiority to the woman as, for instance, among the relatively high-caste Nayars in India. What is important here is not that prostitution means polyandry, but that it means polygamy, which degrades the personal value of women and causes the woman to lose her scarcity value. Viewed superficially, prostitution combines polyandric with polygamic features. But the advantage of the person who gives the money over the person who provides the commodity grants a tremendous superiority to the male and determines the character of prostitution as polygamous. Women consider it embarrassing and degrading to take money from their lover under circumstances that have nothing to do with prostitution, whereas this feeling often does not extend to non-monetary presents. On the contrary, women find pleasure and satisfaction in giving money to their lovers. It has been said that the reason for Marlborough's success with women was that he accepted money from them. The superiority of whoever gives over whoever takes money, which in the case of prostitution has brought about the most terrible social distance, gives to the woman in these contrary instances the satisfaction of imposing dependency upon those whom she would otherwise consider her superiors. But we are confronted with the remarkable fact that in many primitive cultures prostitution is not considered to be humiliating or socially degrading. For instance, it is reported that in ancient Asia the girls of all classes prostituted themselves in order to obtain a dowry or an offering for the temple, and we hear of the same custom being practiced for reasons of marriage among certain African tribes. The girls, often including the prince's daughter, do not lose their reputation in the eyes of the public, nor is there subsequently any prejudice against them in their later married life.